English translation, 150th Contact, Part 1, Saturday, 10th of October, 1981, Arrow 3:15 hours.
Man, you are really lucky I was lying on the divan. What would you have done if I had been lying in bed?
Then I would have called you.
You are really good.
I must speak the same word to you, but as a rebuke.
I do not understand. What did I do that was so crooked?
You plural ignore the rules of order once again.
Not that I know of, my son.
What reasons exist then for the fact that Thomas does not handle his night watch as the rules of order prescribe?
But Quetzal, the rules of order actually state that group members who do not reside in the center only have to perform a night watch if they remain in the center for a night.
That is of correctness, and why is it then being transgressed?
Now, I really do not understand, because Thomas did go home at around 24 hours, as was explicitly clarified according to the instructions that were given last Saturday at the group meeting.
You should not speak the untruth. Or are you actually not oriented about Thomas staying at Kaya's place?
I do not understand that, because only about 20 minutes ago, I took another short walk around the house and did not see a light in her room.
So that is why you thought that Thomas was no longer present. I understand. But that is not so, and that is not good, because the whole thing, even in and of itself, is not of correctness, and there are unreal feelings behind it.
But that is not our matter.
No, we must not do that. But I would like to allude to the fact that through this unrealism, a dereliction of duty appears which should not come to light. According to Saturday's explanation of things, it would have been Thomas's duty to report for the night watch. And as derelict in duty as he is in this case, I have noticed it is not the first time. Particularly with regard to cooperation, my results showed that he is a shirker, if I may use your earthly vocabulary for clarification. This must be made clear to Thomas by the responsible ones on the board of directors and indeed on this very day, whereby you should make sure yourself that in the early morning hours Thomas is called here to work as the rules of order stipulate.
I am really very sorry and embarrassed about all this, but I did not know about it. And I assume that M and E also have no idea that Thomas is at KS.
That should hence correspond to the truth. But I must ask you to pass along a further duty to MSU and E, which is that they make certain that Thomas performs his proper night watches if he has not left the center at around midnight, whereby no leeway of time is to be left open. Midnight should and must be kept punctual. Moreover, the rules of order stipulate that all group members residing outside have to complete an entire night watch, always then, when they stay in the center at night. This means that if a group member is based elsewhere but still spends every night or several nights at the center, that this group member must then take over a full night's watch every single night that the group member remains at the center.
But this is simply impossible because on the following day, the people either have to go away again or else have to work in the center.
That is of correctness. Yet, whoever of the group members can find the time to spend each night or several nights per week in the center, in spite of the daily work and the entire studies, which are in no wise easy, can also perform the night watch. In other words, this also says that the order that has been very painstakingly built up over the years will not be broken again and, moreover, extremely illogical and emotionally decided unreal aberrations, etc., will be prevented or at least arrive in forms that slowly create reasonable clarity.
Okay. I cannot go against your logic because it could not be sharper. But with that which you have said, I think that should now indeed be enough.
Unfortunately not yet, because concerning Thomas I still have to address that rule of order which says that 30 minutes after appearing at the center, the work must be taken up. This also applies in the evening, as Thomas has to lend a hand as a group member when other group members are also still working.
That should really be understandable, because this point is also clearly mentioned in the rules of order and the house rules.
For Thomas, it must be specifically explained once more. On the other hand, through this, it must also be made clear to him that all the rules and regulations are valid for him as well, into which all group members are arranged, and through those alone, the order could be created and can be maintained. Failures from his side cannot find any consideration, just as little as exceptions and special rights. The danger from such things would be far too great, for immediate rebellion and renewed acts of destruction would be the consequence.
I know. That is why I will also immediately do what is necessary in the morning.
That is good.
Probably, but I would like to get some sleep first.
I will have 2 to 3 hours to talk to you, though.
Then so be it.
I will carry out a time shift after that so that you can lay your head to rest after all.
Very nobly expressed. But if that is the case, then I still have a few questions.
Yes.
Of course. First of all, can you give me information concerning to what extent the other two Plejaran groups in America and in Asia maintain contacts with Earth humans?
None since the last spring, which lasts until the middle of 1982.
Aha, then they all went away too.
That is of correctness.
And when they were still there, how was it?
Their contacts with Earth humans were, without exception, in the form that none of the contacts had any knowledge that they stood in contact with our members. Physical or visual visionary contacts were strictly avoided, and also none of this kind took place. Not one of the contacts had any knowledge or suspicion that they stood under our contacts, either in America nor in Asia. Only here in Europe do we maintain a physical contact with you as well as those telepathic contacts, which you are informed about.
Aha, and what about this now? Why were all of the stations vacated, and where have your people gone?
You have never asked about these things before.
I know, because I am not curious about these things either. It would now be interesting for us to know why such displacements of persons are taking place with you, or does it thereby deal with a secret?
It does not deal with such. I am only puzzled by your question, because you have so far kept away from such. Not only did we have to remove all of our available forces from the Earth, but also from many other worlds, including Era. We need all available forces because the population of a whole system, which includes 16 inhabited planets and 3 suns, has prepared itself for a space traversal in warlike form because their system is doomed. The targets of these still war-accustomed humans are the habitable planets of the most diverse constellations, whereby also the Sol system is included, and thus the Earth. These rather inhumane human life forms are willing to kill the inhabitants of the planets they have chosen in order to gain their own living space. On the one hand, our forces now prevent these life forms from realizing their plans by breaking out into space, but on the other hand, further of our forces systematically resettle the populations of the various endangered planets in uninhabited but easily habitable areas, while another part of our forces looks for new habitable and suitable planets on which the rest of these human beings can be settled and relocated.
Incredible. But cannot the Lyrans and vegans also help you with that?
We have also included many forces of theirs for this task. Another part of them will take over on the Earth at the end of this month, as I explained to you earlier.
I know you spoke of the fact that Manara's father, brother, and sister will come here, along with 35 others.
That is of correctness, but these 38 human beings only represent the first wave that will take over our own station and our tasks. Ours and both of those two other stations, America and Asia, will be fully staffed with our allies.
So with vegans and Lyrans, and are they all differently colored?
You say that they are chocolate brown.
Well, this is a happy surprise. But tell me, while we are on the subject of other colors of human beings, have you learned more about the origin of the Chinese and Japanese in the meantime?
Unfortunately, no, and at present we have to stop this research. However, we are close to the goal, and we will inform you as soon as we have a final result.
That's all I wanted to know. Then another question. Take a look in my office. There is a drawing by Lee Elders on the little brown table. He drew me a boomerang-like ship of unknown origin. Such ships are said to have been sighted several times in America recently and in the past few months, and they are said to be completely black in color and to have huge spotlights in operation at night. Is this known to you? And if so, what explanations can you give me in this regard?
I see the paper you mentioned here in my view screen, and I can also explain some things to you about it. The drawing is incorrect, because these flying apparatuses are much less wedge-shaped than the drawing shows. So the wing-like side bodies are further apart. The size of the devices varies from a few meters to several hundred meters. The building material is of an extremely hard and resistant material, unlike our materials, which are of a soft form. These flying apparatuses are also, as you mentioned, for the most part black, but they also have various other colors which, however, have apparently not been observed, and which are usually also drowned out by the black. Unfortunately, we cannot clarify the origin of these flying apparatuses, which we have been observing and controlling for 11 years, because there is no possibility that we can get in touch with the occupants of the apparatuses. The flying apparatuses are constructed in such a way that all our attempts at communication have failed, because our swinging waves and vibrations and all other kinds of like are absorbed by the outer shells of the apparatuses. No radio wave and no other swinging wave can penetrate into the interior of the flying apparatus, because the outer shell of each apparatus absorbs everything in the sense of storing energy for the ship's propulsion and everything else. This means, among other things, that these flying apparatuses are constructed in such a way that they absorb all waves of all frequencies, and thus all swinging waves of all kinds, as well as sunlight and all the radiation that appears with it, etc., for the storage of force. But also the moonlight and the weak light of the stars are absorbed and stored as force, together with many other things which are still unknown even to earthly scientists. What is certain, however, is that the life forms dominating these flying apparatuses are humane and reveal no hostility whatsoever, as has been impeccably proven by our 11 years of observation and control.
That is fabulous, and you have not yet found a means of contacting these newts?
No, so far we have not found a means. Maybe we will succeed if...
You think if they are still on Earth long enough, whizzing through our airspace?
Exactly. But now I want to explain to you the next predictions for the next years. The last predictions were mainly only for 1 year, until October 1981, because Simya Se had to return early from her contact with you, although it was planned to give you predictions that were calculated over several years.
On the one hand, that is of interest, but on the other hand, I very often wonder whether these predictions have any meaning at all.
Sooner or later, successes will come out of it.
You mean after the occurrence of the events?
Yes, and much later. But let me begin now, Simya Say's statements ended with the assassination of Sadat, who was still warned by you and with my help when I brought you to him on the 28th of July. The next event, which will take place very soon, concerns the Israeli political murderer Moshe Dayan, who will die of natural causes in a few days from today. In the following, earthquakes will again be registered in various places on Earth, which will be classified in the run-up to the great earthquake catastrophe, which, however, is not yet to be discussed. The next sensational event will occur on the 28th of October in Sweden. It will be that a submarine of the USSR will have to be arrested in Swedish waters by the Swedish Navy, because the boat will be engaged in espionage in their waters. Due to a carelessness of the navigational forces, the submarine gets into distress, after which it is towed free by the Swedish Navy. This in itself would be a political trifle, but the fact that the submarine will carry nuclear weapons will become known, causing all sorts of political turmoil. Only the 6th of November will put a temporary end to this event, when the USSR submarine will be taken out of Swedish territorial waters again. On the 31st of October, Switzerland will be in turmoil because a demonstration involving 20,000 people will take place in Kaiser Augst, which is large by Swiss standards. This demonstration will be directed against the construction of the nuclear power plant, which will be approved for construction by the Swiss Federal Council despite all citizen protests, which must be equated to a crime against the people, the country, the culture, the fauna, and the flora, like any other construction of such plants, which never find arguments for justification.
In this regard, I would like to ask a question for once. Is there really no way to use nuclear energy without causing great danger to human beings, animals, plants, etc.?
This possibility exists, and we are also using it. Earth humans, however, are not yet able to do this. Nevertheless, he works negligently and completely irresponsibly with nuclear energy, thereby deliberately creating deadly dangers for all life forms. Atomic energy may only be used by human beings in every respect, when all the substances and waste materials produced can be used and processed without any danger whatsoever, to such an extent that absolutely radiation-free matter is produced. This, however, is only possible through a transformation process that converts the radioactive radiation back into the original matter, which in turn creates the original matter. But if human beings work with or use radioactive materials before they are capable of the transformation process back to the original matter, then they are acting criminally and in violation of natural law in every form.
But then, how are the energy problems to be solved?
Every planet always supplies its life forms with sufficient natural energy, which is not dangerous in any way. However, this requires that the planet has the normal population and does not fall prey to overpopulation. The Earth is now overpopulated with about 4,004,000 humans 1981, and has become completely disordered through the lust for power, profit, and luxury of the Earth humans. If Earth humans would be sensible and introduce an expedient birth stop, then a reduction of earthly humanity, back to the normal level of 529 million, could be carried out in a short time. This would solve the energy problem naturally, as well as the problem of food procurement. However, the stupidity of Earth humans in this respect is boundless, for without any responsibility they violate all the laws of nature, whereby they are also unresponsive to the ending of this problem, to which must be added the false humanity that still protects and promotes this crime of overpopulation, as well as the problem of famine, etc. The re-establishment of the normal population of earthly humanity alone would be the correct and only solution in the matter of solving the energy and food problems. Everything else is always just illogical partial solutions, representing illogical effects from illogical origins.
But after what is just today, surely there should be a solution to solve these problems.
That is of correctness. But these solutions can only be time-conditioned, because the problems continue to grow due to the increasing overpopulation and thus due to the unreasonableness and greed of Earth humans. It would therefore be quite wrong for me to state and explain those possibilities which actually exist for thoroughly solving these problems of energy and food. We can only get involved in the naming of such possibilities when Earth humans make an effort to drastically reduce and naturally decimate planetary humanity to normal levels. Only then would we be able to point out possibilities of problem solving so that these problems would actually be solved during the reduction.
But with the irrational madness of the human beings of Earth, this will not be able to be the case because they will not be taught.
The Earth humanity drives itself thereby into a helpless abyss. The Earth humans, however, are not to become extinct and annihilated, which is why appropriate measures must be taken.
And how should these look like then?
As erroneous as that sounds with the knowledge of earthly overpopulation, a new nation must be founded. However, it must be a people that lives according to the natural creational laws, whereby they become a prototype to the great mass of stultified Earth humans and have a teaching effect on them. However, I will give you more details about this at a later date, in connection with other matters relating to your group.
Aha, that is already clear. You are just thinking that our group will be the foundation of this new people, and indeed through the constantly new group members and their descendants.
That is of correctness, and we are, with the approval of the High Council, in the process of allowing this new people to emerge as a foundation stock for some time.
I am aware of that. Some things have already happened, while the rest is still to come, with the next year already bringing growth in several forms, if I am not mistaken. But the intended process will take many centuries, if it can be fulfilled at all, for the influx to the group will be small for a long time, so it will grow only slowly.
That is how it is foreseen and determined to be, though we have some difficulty in keeping the explanations within a good framework, because the group members themselves still think unreasonably about these things. Their attitude, their false views and the like make everything difficult for us, although everything would be quite easy if we could act after that which corresponds to correctness. Thus, for the time being, we are still dependent on manipulations that do not bring the desired full success, which means that we often have to accept actions for which we still have to expend all kinds of effort, but which also do not guarantee us that full success will be achieved.
I understand, and I know what the problem is.
Yes, you know the problem, but now we are talking about other things again. Because I still have a lot to explain. Until the 29th of November, nothing of great importance will happen in the world if we disregard the unnecessary shouting about Poland. The 29th of November, however, will then bring another event that will be widely broadcasted by the channels of publication of human beings, although it is a quite natural event. On this day in America, the actress Natalie Wood will be retrieved dead from the sea, in which she will drown after a marital quarrel and in a drunken state. After that, there is again not much of significance, until finally in Poland the point is reached that brings things to a head. A General Jaruzelski will impose martial law on the country in order to put an end to the years of destructive activity of large masses of the population and the politically subversive trade union, whose leader is one Lech Walesa. As usual, Earth humans also fail to see the truth here, which is why they take sides with the trade union and cry out in favor of false humanity. No one wants to see and recognize that these agitators truly want to seize power in the country, that they are work-shy, and that for years, through evil compulsion, they have driven the entire country and the entire population into hardship and misery, into hunger and into financial ruin. So it will come as it must come, which unfortunately will cost many human lives. But in Poland, the existing violence of a large part of the people and the trade union solidarity can only be broken again by Gewalt. Unfortunately, in the false humanitarianism of the Western world,
unjustified sides are also taken for Poland, whereby especially the Polish army leadership and the leadership of the USSR are once more being illegally sanctioned another time.
the sense of true humanity has unfortunately long since been lost among Earth humans, which is why here, too, a completely wrong policy will be pursued another time, whereby the truth will be completely misjudged, and those who are wrong will be placed in an unjustified and unjustifiably good light, namely the Solidarity Trade Union and its adherents, the work-shy, who know no bounds in their greed for money and might. The Western countries and peoples, however, do not want to see this truth, which is why, in misconceived humanity, they will seek to blame the rulers of Poland and Russia, who, however, in this case are truly not to blame for anything. Not last, but foremost of this false humanitarianism and anti-propaganda against Poland's and Russia's governments will be the blame of American President Reagan, who will behave like a little boy in office and impose dangerous sanctions against Russia and Poland.
But there is nothing else to be expected, since you once declared that Reagan will be the real founder of the next world arms race.
That is of correctness, because he will be the greatest warmonger and power-hungry man at the present time since the time of the last World War. This, however, will cost him very badly, about which I will give you the necessary information at a later time. His final exit will be as inglorious as also the lifting of the sanctions he imposed and the settlement of the Polish crisis.
That will indeed be inevitable. But please say how it will look for the whole world this winter, which would be something of greater interest than stupid and primitive politics.
There is a lot brewing. The whole of Europe and very large parts of America will be flooded by enormous masses of water, causing billions of dollars worth of material damage and also claiming many human lives. Especially Switzerland, Germany, England, France, and America will suffer from enormous water masses which will bury and destroy many things, but which constitutes only a small part of everything that this winter brings with itself. Besides tremendously large snowfalls, the clouds will open their sluices for very large amounts of rain, freezing into ice, which also points to the anticipation of unusual cold spells. As such, the human beings of these affected areas only very rarely experience, when nature calls forth natural changes. But all the events of this winter, as the preceding and the ones still to follow, are not just attributable to natural events alone, but also to the outrageous unreasonableness of the earth human against nature, etc. Temperatures will drop to 60 and more degrees below zero in certain areas, and everything will freeze over. The average degree of coldness, however, will be from 30 to 40 degrees below zero in various areas in Europe and America, which means the death and destruction of many human lives and animals, as well as crops, etc., and these cold spells will also not stop at the more southern regions, with the American vacation paradise of Florida, etc., in particular, being extremely badly affected by the destruction and cold. However, Australia will also have to suffer, especially from a great drought, but also from great water ingresses. However, all this will not yet mean the end or the contentment of this winter, because partly quite vicious earthquakes will also occur around the world at this time, whereby especially America will be the land where most quakes will appear, next to North Africa, Italy, Oceania, and Japan, as well as China and Russia. But practically all of the countries of the earth will be shaken by lesser and greater quakes, whereby in different places, also volcanic eruptions will thereby come to light, which, as well, are partly due to the crazy human effort of destroying the earth, but especially in recent years, the atomic bomb tests, etc., have contributed a large part to the release of these events. The end of winter, which will bring with it many other evil events, will also once again claim many human lives and material values, for the snowmelt will not only cause enormous avalanches to fall and destroy a great deal, but there will also be floods due to enormous meltwaters, as well as landslides and rock slides, which will destroy a great deal, from which Switzerland will not remain spared. Such events, however, already set themselves in, even before the middle of winter is reached, and they will continue well into the third millennium and will bring death, destruction, and annihilation.
Well, that is a fine outlook, man, oh man. Apparently, we can prepare ourselves for some pretty terrific things in the next year and in the decades to come, as well as in the new millennium.
The center will not be drawn very hard into these detrimental effects. As you know, it is located very safely, which is also the case in terms of weather influences. Even though you are located over 800 meters high in elevation, nevertheless, the cold weather will not attack you as much as will be the case in the lower situated and other regions. Your location is on the ridge of a valley basin, which not only diverts storms, snow, and rain to very large parts around you, but also protects you against all too great cold spells, which are driven off, in large part, around the ridge of hills. I estimate that your maximum temperatures will be around 18 degrees below zero on average, but in extreme cases, they could drop to around 29 degrees below zero, which is hardly to be expected due to the protective chains of hills around you. However, a direct polar cold air wedge would have to penetrate here from the north if it should become colder than 18 degrees below zero, or if the highest mark, meaning coldest, should actually be exceeded. Everywhere outside of your valley, it will normally be very much colder than it will be with you, which can be a reassurance to you. You really have a good location in many regards.
We have noticed that too, especially with storms and hurricanes, because they have usually always diverged around the ridges of the hills, even the hailstorms.
As I said, you live in a good place, even if it cannot be excluded with certainty that one kind of weather or another cannot fall into your valley basin, but this will be a rarity.
I also said that we know that we repeat ourselves.
That is of correctness. So let's talk about other things again.
That should be the correct way to go. But if you do not mind, I have one more question.
Of course, so ask then.
Good. What do you think about this? You told me months ago that I should prepare a peace writing and should deliver it to all governments and peace movements. But you also said that you would help me with it, but I have not seen anything of it yet. For my part, I have not yet found the time to get behind this work. How would it be now if someone from the group, or even some members together, were to write such a paper, after which the two of us together could only bring it into the proper form? Would this not be an acceptable suggestion?
The idea is good because frankly I have not found the time to devote to this task either. Your suggestion would free both of us from a great deal of work, if at least only the concept of the script were written by one or more group members.
Then I will see to it that this is taken in hand.
Also, the new intermittent writing is due.
I know, and I hope to still manage the first edition before the first quarter is over.
That would be very gratifying. But listen now further to what I still have to report to you about the future. Namely, a great deal will occur, but no influences will arise from the SOL lineup of celestial bodies in the month of March 1982, since all SOL celestial bodies are on an Earth lateral course and are, thus in a short angle on one side of the Sun. All stars are far too distant from the Earth to have even the slightest direct influence on the Earth and its life forms. And as you know, only change phenomena of the central sun swinging waves and central sun radiations occur. But these only have a pure astrological value, which means that they, as purely neutral central sun forces, exhibit only a variable value for the life forms which use these in negative or positive form.
That is clear to me. But while we are already on the subject of the stars, I still have another question regarding Saturn. As is well known to you, the American space probe Voyager travels past Saturn and sends images back to Earth. This will make the scientists' eyes wide open once again, as they did with Jupiter, because they will inevitably have to realize once more from the recordings that around this immature dwarf sun more satellites also orbit than was previously assumed. As far as I know, it has been claimed up to now that Saturn has only 10 or 12 moons, although in reality it has 29, if I leave out the Adons. Now I would be interested to know if these moons are all discovered by image transmissions from probes, etc.
This will be so and more. As you already could ascertain for yourself on your great journey at the place and location, there are 29 moons orbiting Saturn, which are actually to be regarded as such. These should be discovered in their entire number by probes and telescopes in about 25 years. In reality, however, there are not so many moons that can still be discovered up to this number. Because since your journey to Saturn, earthly scientists have discovered several more moons, which apparently escaped you in the course of the last few years. After the discovery of the moons around Jupiter, scientists now reckon that they will also still find some undiscovered satellites around Saturn, but nevertheless, there will still be a surprise for them.
You think because of the Adonis, some of which orbit millions of kilometers outside Saturn?
That is of correctness. These small planets, called Adonis, as you correctly say, are so small that they cannot be detected and seen from Earth, at least not at present, because the necessary instruments do not yet exist. A large part of these small planets will certainly be detected by various probes and Earth-orbiting telescopes, which will cause some confusion among scientists.
I can imagine that, because there is quite a large number of them orbiting Saturn, besides the few small wandering Adonis that only pass by this Sol satellite from time to time. But I can understand why they are not visible from the Earth, because on average they only have a diameter of between 10 and 50 kilometers, if I remember correctly what Pa and Simya-se explained to me back then in the year 1975. In addition, there are supposed to be some smaller ones as well as larger ones at a huge distance from Saturn.
That is of correctness, but you should also know where these Adonis came to Saturn from.
Of course, Simya-se said at the time that these small satellites were in part larger fragments of the planet Malona, which had its orbit between Mars and Jupiter before it was destroyed and torn into thousands of pieces by an explosion unreasonably produced by the human beings there. While the greatest part of the destroyed planet orbited the Sun as an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, some small groups of Adonis separated and flew out into space by the expansion forces of the planetary explosion, a larger group of which then came into the gravitational pull of Saturn which has since held them as tiny satellites. Which at the same time means that they are not actual moons of the unfinished solar planet, but just immigrant foreign bodies the size of Adonis, while the number of Saturn's actual moons is only 29.
That is of correctness, but let us leave it at that, for I still have other things to explain to you. The time following after the last mentioned events will bring a brief respite from great or greater events. Even natural disasters will hold themselves within a small frame because, besides some earthquakes and floods, not much will happen related to this, other than in China, Japan, and also Mexico, where a larger quake will make itself noticeable with human losses. In the month of May, Europe will be the next in line in this regard, whereby especially Germany will be the central point, but without major damage. On the other hand, winter will break in again briefly in various European areas, when it will be assumed by the humans that it is already over. Until about 10 May, snow will fall again in Switzerland, Germany, and other European countries, after spring has already let its flowers bloom, but this will not cause any serious damage. Towards the end of April or the beginning of May,
The Pope of Rome will again squander the money of his faithful, for once again he will embark on an extremely costly journey to various countries, which will cost many millions of dollars.
Thus, he will also visit Portugal, where he will hypocritically let it be announced that the Madonna of Fatima had protected him, helping him survive the assassination attempt that had been perpetrated on his life. However, with this consciously mendacious and fraudulent allegation to his believers, he will encourage the hatred of a Catholic priest of a different faith, who will want to kill him and will attack him with a dagger, but this will be thwarted by security personnel before the priest arrives in the direct vicinity of the Pope. After his stay in Portugal, the Pope will proceed to England, which will be considered a sensation because no pope has made such an effort to reach out to the English Church since the secession of the English Anglican Church from Rome. The Pope's whole trip to England, however, is truthfully not for Christian bonding relations and the renewed fraternization of the Roman and English churches, as the Pope will mendaciously announce, because, firstly, he is only concerned with his personal image, which he wants to consolidate and build up, and secondly, he is also concerned with bringing the English Church back under the sovereignty of the Roman Papal See through intriguing machinations.
I find that the present Pope is discussed inciting, mendacious, hypocritical, one who deliberately misleads the human beings and is a toadying pulpit creep, who only wants to lead a nice life and make a name for himself. When I think of other popes, then I must say that different ones among them at least still believed in what they said and did, while this pope is only acting, although he is a damn bad actor.
Your words are of appropriate correctness, but this pope will not be able to pursue his evil deeds for much longer. He has also already predetermined his end through his criminal actions, but I do not want to make any statements about that at the moment. It is more appropriate that I tell you that this deceitful man is now scheming to visiting your home country, Switzerland, where he wants to appear in Geneva and continue his acting. In addition, he will also endeavor to get to Argentina in order to break in on the population there, and with his dishonest manner concerning the war between Argentina and England. Namely, in the month of April 1982, the Argentines will militarily seize the Falkland Islands, which are under the English colony, whereupon England will send out a war fleet, which will then lead to a real small-scale war between the two states, which will claim many human lives and war material. This war, however, will be a sign of a third world conflagration threatening in the third millennium. Moreover, This will also be the actual fundamental point for the fact that in this world war, if it cannot be prevented, England will be attacked from the east with great might. This, however, is still in the far future, and when the time comes, no one will look for the justification for the attack on England in this forthcoming Falklands conflict, which will break out in the month of April 1982, although, truthfully, the origin will lie there.
That is what that snotty girl Thatcher and the Argentine army boors are for, isn't it? They should all be taken out into a public square together, in front of a worldwide TV camera, pull down their pants, put them over their knee, and give them a good textbook spanking.
You amuse me, but it would truly be a very effective solution, because it would make their positions impossible, of which they are incapable anyway.
The truth is that all of them together are not adults at all, but scallywags, even snotty-nosed little boys and girls.
Your dialect expressions are very apt, and there is not a single grown-up person among them, as also with most of the other rulers of the earth.
Finally, an open word relating to this, and those who would actually be somewhat suited as executive personnel are not man enough to enforce what is right because they do not dare to stand up to their party comrades, perhaps because they fear for their posts.
That is of correctness, but we should not talk about these things, because they extend into politics.
Nevertheless, it is so, and I do not think we are politicizing when we point out what is wrong with governments.
That is probably of correctness, but the Earth human still tends to get things wrong. Thus, let us turn to other things again.
That is fine with me. Also, I have a question that has nothing to do with the whole area of political crap. I calculated the date of the 11th of May to be the time when Bernadette should give birth to her son based on her statements. At the same time, another date, or several, came up, so namely, the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd of May, 1982. Which of these is correct? On my side, I conclude the 11th of May because this is the nearest possibility.
Some mistakes must have slipped in you, but this is understandable because of the condition of your nerves. You know that you also must have healthy and functioning nerves for such calculations. But if this is not the case, then there will be errors that you cannot grasp or recognize, which is also proven by the difference between the days of the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd of May. The first date is closest to the truth, but unfortunately it is also incorrect. The birth will take place on the 9th of May, in the early hours of the afternoon, shortly after 14 Oaks Horrors.
I know, my nerves are once again not as in order as they should be. On several occasions I have wanted to get behind some tasks, but it simply does not and could not be done.
That is of correctness, because the correct functioning of your nerves is extremely necessary for your work. But now I should report to you further about the coming events, for that is our present main topic.
It is, yes. Then maybe you can also tell me what is going to now happen with the filming. I mean, what will happen in regards to our film, which is supposed to be made by the Americans about our mission, etc. Can you give me any information on that?
I already explained to you at an earlier date that this work must be completed no later than the end of 1982, because after that, you will have no more time for it. For this reason, we have set all responsible persons in America under our pertinent purpose-oriented impulse radiations, through which they will be led to work more intensively. And as things now look, it seems that around the 25th of April 1982, this film work will be started, so the film will come about in the foreseeable future.
I simply do not understand why I should have no time anymore for film work from 1983 onwards.
Besides the additional upcoming routine work that will come about from the film itself, human beings in Japan will also begin to be interested in our entire cause in the largest measure, so much additional work will be expected of you from this. Further film work will also be included if our calculations prove themselves as given. Now, however, we should no longer speak of these things, for in regard to world events of the coming time there is still much to explain. For example, that in the middle of the year 1982, the time will be reached among the peoples of the earth which will decisively form the guidelines of that which will make the destiny of human beings almost unalterable. However, despite the fact that these guidelines will appear, the eyes of Earth humans will remain closed and blind, as also will their sense of truth. In the main, it concerns the criminal concerns of the would-be statesman Begin, who will commit another monstrous crime under the eyes of the world public, without the rest of the world intervening to stop the terrible killing. In the middle of 1982, Begin will demonstrate his true character when he allows an attack on the capital Beirut in Lebanon by Wargavalt and destroys most of it, whereby many thousands of innocent human beings, women, men, and children, will find death. The murderous Ausgeartete, zu Menachem Begin, will bring excuses that will attract attention in the UN and in the rest of the world, although behind Begin's actions lies nothing other than the insane greed for the shedding of human blood and the greed for unlimited power over the whole country and all its ethnic groups.
He is a cowardly swine and a scoundrel without equal. My reflection about him has revealed that he is a damn rotten creature who lives entirely criminally, is vindictive and boundless in his cowardice. He is not only a zero, an absolute nothing and a naught, but in addition an unparalleled scoundrel, and moreover a psychopath of the same size as Khomeini, the insane Ayatollah in Iran. Begin is in the same sick hospital as Khomeini, cowardly, deceitful, mean, selfish, power-hungry, psychopathic, validity-addicted and domineering, a megalomaniac, and who is otherwise burdened with all the malignancies into which a person could have lapsed. He is an absolute Ausgearteter, one who has gotten very badly out of control of their good human nature, and unworthy of life. He is a human being who has never been able to work out the ability to live honestly and to become a human being. An absolute zero who wants to cover up his absolute inability to live through cowardice and bloodlust, whereby those in charge of all Earth governments are stupid enough not to recognize this fact, and consequently let Begin have his way, instead of bringing him and his addiction to power to heel, dissolving his power and nipping the thinking of power completely in the bud. But the Earth humans, and especially the responsible rulers, are so blinded and stupid that they do not recognize the truth. Thus, also not the actual sense of Begin's actions and his associated infamous and cunning plots, which truly have only become properly built up through his office, as it was with the treacherous criminal acts of Emmanuel's traitor, namely of Judah Ihariot. Begin's ancestors, already in their olden times, were probably criminals of all types and kinds, who drank in friendship with their potential or assumed enemies at times, in order to then treacherously murder them, to slaughter them when they were drunk out of their senses and defenseless. And after they had slanderously falsified their own chronicles, like Israel, and placed Emmanuel's traitor, who was not a disciple, as Judas Iscariot, Emmanuel's disciple Judas Iscariot was made out to be a traitor to this day, while the true traitor, the high priest's son Judah Ihariot, is not even mentioned in the lying chronicles, so that the true traitor should be innocent of the murder of Emmanuel.
Your words speak helpless anger, my friend. Anger over the fact that you preach the truth to the Earth humans for nothing, and that, thereby, this criminal would-be politician can continue to murder under the eyes of the Earth population and realize his goals, namely, to seize the rule of the entire country more and more to himself. But you cannot and are not able to do anything in this respect by spreading the truth, for the murderous and human blood-demanding death power of the serious criminal has already become too great. so that only the fulfillment of the prophecies can bring about a change in the bloodthirsty lust for power and domination of this Ausgearteten. In his country Israel, so says a prophecy, will be destroyed in the distant future from the lands of the East, through war and death, when the fighters of the East will wade knee-deep in the blood of the human beings of Israel. And all this only because the leaders of all world governments are just as blind and cowardly as the populations of many countries of the earth in order that they would put a stop to the criminal, murderous, and human blood-thirsty would-be politicians and criminal politicians in Israel.
The world will have to learn what snakes they are feeding at their bosom.
It certainly will, but only when everything has become unavoidable. The delusions of grandeur and the denial of truth of the earth humans, unfortunately, make them recognize the truth only too late. Thus, in the middle of 1982, it will not be enough for the criminal begin to wage a murderous and brutal war of extermination in Beirut against the Palestinians. But this criminal will continue in even further and harder measures, because he will never give up his plans for territorial reign. Thus, not only will many thousands of innocent people, children, women and men, die in Beirut, but also afterwards in the future, if this felonious wannabe big shot continues to pursue his country conquest plans, with the responsible people of the world still looking on stupidly and without understanding and even indulging him, as well as the humans of the peoples who still believe in reparations for the sufferings of the Jews during the Second World War. What these believers do not understand is that a reparation for the infamous actions of the Third Reich is impossible, and that such a reparation can never be made to the survivors and descendants of those who were murdered and slaughtered in the Third Reich between 1939 and 1945 by the indirect orders of the Thule Society via Adolf Hitler and his generals and other leading powers, etc. A reparation could only take place with the victims themselves, which, however, is impossible. However, a reparation to the surviving relatives and descendants, etc., is completely misdirected because most of these human beings live in hatred and vindictiveness, as well as with cravings for power and in materialism, for the purposes of seizing the rule of the country to themselves and subjugating, exploiting, and enslaving the rest of the humanity of the country. Thus the great mass of Earth humans lives under the false delusion for an unwarranted reparation for an evil deed suffered by their ancestors and predecessors, by which the Earth humans nourish a very vicious, poisonous, and life-threatening snake at their bosom. So it will happen that in the month of July 1982, the Palestinian refugees, expelled out of their rightful homeland, should be forced through the accomplished war events released by Begin, the land that was home to them, and which belonged to them for millennia, and which brought much death and destruction to them, to have to recognize it as Israel, as a state.
That just cannot be true.
That will, unfortunately, certainly be so, as Begin will implement the expulsion of the Palestinians from Beirut with murder and destruction, without the responsible ones in countries of the earth and earth humanity doing anything about it, or recognizing what the actual plans in the criminal Begin's brain really are concerning snatching the rule over the land to himself.
Thus, this should then be the time when Iran will also start a new major offensive against Iraq, right?
Apparently you have concerned yourself with these matters a little more closely?
I have, yes.
Good then. Yes. In the month of July, the Iranians, under the high command of the mad Ayatollah Khomeini, will again drive the war forward, which by then has been going on for some 2 years, towards a high point, with many thousands of human beings dying again on both sides, among the Iranians as well as the Iraqis.
There is simply no end to the insanity.
You know why?
Yes, but how is it actually with the disasters around the middle of the year 1982, which are evoked by the weather and climate, etc.?
At least in the month of July, very bad things happen in this respect. Also, your homeland, Switzerland, will be afflicted by the most severe storms, especially the areas of the Jura. Concerning this, bad things will also happen around your center, whereby you yourselves will get away with minor damage at this time. Heavy hailstorms will hit Switzerland and France in particular, but very wild waters will also occur, destroying crops, buildings, roads, fields, forests, and meadows, among many other things, as a result of heavy storms. This will happen after bright sunshine will have appeared for only a few weeks. What falls in various places as too much water to the earth will lack in other places, but then afterwards heavy thunderstorms and floods and destruction will also occur there. In Japan alone, storms and floods will occur in the Nagasaki area, which will cost many hundreds of human lives. Thousands of houses will be destroyed, as will also be the case in various other countries, along with immeasurable further damage to cultures, animal life forms, and everything that human beings have created.
Then there is a rather nasty year.
That will be so, that is of correctness. Also, new diseases will appear among Earth humans, and even epidemics will break out in some countries at various times. But this still will not be enough, because at this point in time, only the first half of the year 1982 will have passed.
Then after the first half of the year there are still quite evil things to be expected.
That is of correctness. But I would like to report on this again chronologically. For many of the coming happenings after the first half of 1982 represent precursors or further developments of the insanity of the Earth humans, which have already begun or will still begin, and which will extend into 1983 and even into later decades.
But before this, I would like to ask you whether you can first answer one more question for me that is still on my chest.
Then ask.
In the next few years and decades, comets will pass through the sky more frequently again. Also such comets as Halley's Comet, which can practically be observed in broad daylight in the sky. Now my question. When you took me on the great journey in 1975, I saw outside our solar and planetary system the enormous belt of materials made of frozen acids. Rocks, adenids, and lifeless planets, some of which were quite large. Similar to the asteroid belt outside the orbit of Mars, this belt also moves around the Sun, but very far outside the orbit of Pluto. At that time you explained to me that celestial bodies of all kinds passing by this belt, such as dark stars and other space bodies, from time to time tear smaller or larger bodies out of this belt and bring them into a different orbit to the Sun, which can then be observed and thus seen from Earth, partly as comets. If I remember correctly, you told me at that time that the extent of this belt was still largely unknown to Earth humans, but that more would soon be discovered, which apparently has not yet been the case, because I have not yet seen, heard, or read anything about it. Furthermore, you have explained that this material belt consists of residues from the formation of the solar system and of immigrant materials from outer space, etc. Now I wonder what percentage of comets is occurring in our solar system that originates from this material belt outside the Pluto orbit. See Existent Life in the Universe by Billy Wassermannsite Publishing.
It has probably escaped your attention, but this belt was in the meantime discovered and actually by a Dutch astronomer named Oort. In accordance with his discovery, the discovered belt will be called the Oort cloud in Earth's scientific circles. But that is about it, because the connections of this belt to the comets of the Sol system are still, to my knowledge, foreign and unknown to the Earth scientists. The truth is, However, that around 97% of the Sol system comets originate from this belt, just as planetary bodies passing by this belt, by their gravitational pull, upset the trajectory of the materials, so that they then suddenly swirl around and from them, isolated larger and smaller objects detach themselves, to be forced into a new orbit around the Sun system, where they then appear as comets, while others fly far away from the Sun into free space to disappear somewhere in the vastness of space, often also as dark wandering planets, which are sometimes also caught again by larger stars as satellites, and then orbit them far away from the new parent stars. Others, however, rush uncontrollably through space as dark wandering objects.
So then only about 3% of all comets in the Sol system originate from outside and from somewhere in space.
That is of correctness.
You also said at the time that the majority of all meteors were not just whizzing through our system from the asteroid belt, but that by far the greater part came from the two belts outside Pluto. These space projectiles are also the ones that crash into moons and planets and into the Sun and will crash even further in the future, while only a smaller proportion comes from the asteroid belt.
That is of correctness, but you should keep quiet about that, especially regarding the second belt.
I know, but you said to me, I remember it well, that I could talk about it after 1980, because by then the Earth scientists would have discovered these facts for themselves. That time is up, even though I have not heard anything like that about the belts.
This is also of correctness. The sense of my words was also not to criticize you, for I only wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we explained to you at that time that you were not to make your knowledge known before 1980.
That is how I also took it. But tell me now, Halley's Comet, for example, and Comet Roland, they come as projectiles from deep space, yes? At least that is how I understood it at the time.
This is also of correctness. They belong to the 3% of foreign system comets.
So one could say that 97% of all comets are Sol system cohabitants?
If you want to formulate it in such a manner, then that is of correctness, although we ourselves see it differently, and I must explain that these comets stem from other systems in space.
Of course, according to your explanation that every star and every planet with its own satellites represents a system of its own, which is why you also speak, for example, of Jupiter or Saturn and Uranus, etc., as other systems, but not of our solar system. This is known to me, but it still initiates confusion for us, because for us the SOL system as such is called that with all its planets, their satellites, and including the failed small suns Saturn and Jupiter. As a rule, we only speak of the Sun with its planets as a system, whereas we do not speak of planets and their moons as a system.
That which is necessary has already been explained about this at an earlier point in time.
Of course, I think it was necessary to address this fact again.
I understand you probably think of misunderstandings.
Exactly. But my questions are answered now, so you can go on and continue speaking about those things that concern earthly events in the future time. I have interrupted you on the matters of the nasty storms of 1982 and the matters of diseases and epidemics.
That is of correctness, and precisely in regard to these matters, I have some explanations to make. Quite particularly from the month of July 1982, the most severe storms will occur, which will cause great damage in the European area. Switzerland will be affected thereof as well, as also Germany and Austria and various other European states. Destruction of houses and other buildings, roads, fields, vineyards, crops, railways and vehicles, etc. will occur, with flooding also triggered by torrential thunder showers. In many parts of Switzerland, enormous damage will be caused by the storms, particularly in the Jura region, as well as in the area of Andelfingen. Unfortunately, human lives will also be lamented, both from lightning strikes and indirect causes of the flood storms. From these torrential and flood thunderstorms, your center will also not remain spared, which is also why I give the advice to secure the entire area as good as possible in view of the coming water ingresses, as well as everything else that needs to be done to avoid damage caused by these expected thunderstorms.
That is quicker said than done because it will probably be like always, namely that the insight and commitment for this work only occurs when the damage has already been incurred. Unfortunately, before that, it does not work out. I also know of exposed locations where damage may occur, especially landslides, etc., but one will only be able to fix these up when it is too late or almost too late.
I am aware of that. It is actually so that until now you still must supervise and order everything, and that also the monitoring still lies with you, as well as the overseeing that work is carried out expeditiously. It can be said that a true and rapid work performance can only occur in less than 4 group members in the center, and a reasonable work performance only truly comes about if you yourself lend a hand. But then, if you do the work entirely, a greater performance appears than is the case with 3 normally working men working in a collective manner. In this regard, you actually replace 3 strong and work-conscious men.
You exaggerate a little, my son. Better go on now with your predictions.
As you wish. Approximately on the 15th of August, 1982, southern Italy will again be struck by an earthquake, for this part of Italy will not rest for some time. But Switzerland and Germany will also have to endure a lot of unrest in this special case, but in a different area. Like an epidemic, especially in these 2 countries, all kinds of unrest and suffering are being spread by sex offenders, as well as by the foolish behavior and degeneracy of young girls. The year 1982 will be for Switzerland and for Germany a year during which, particularly from about the middle of the year, many of the schoolgirls and teenage girls, through lust for adventure and without the knowledge of the parents, go away from home to travel like gypsies through the land and countries, while many others will be seduced by sexual offenders, will be raped and beaten, and will be brought to death. Thus, in this respect, the year 1982 will be a very bad time for Switzerland and Germany, as well as for new mass murders, whereby particularly family mass murders will appear. Elsewhere, a new and dangerous epidemic also appears, triggered by the shamelessness and sexual greed and degeneracy of Earth humans, who have already lost themselves in the unbridled and animalistic gratification of sexual desires and their degenerate urges. In this respect, animals are in truth decidedly more highly developed than Earth humans, for animals naturally have their mating season, while Earth humans in this respect suffer from abnormal and thought-generated sexual greed, and also live and act accordingly. This, however, will have its consequences, for such offenses against the laws of nature always bring evil consequences. Thus it will be that a new epidemic like venereal disease, which is already rampant in the USA, will be introduced and spread to Europe. This is a very malignant form of immunodeficiency, which cannot be combated for the time being, and which will therefore be incurable and claim many human lives for decades to come.
That's a nice outlook for the human beings of this world. But tell me, you also told me during my great journey at that time about a serious illness that was to arise with regard to space travel. You said something at that time about the human beings of Earth finding out very soon through their space experiments that they could not do this primitive kind of space travel they were doing without serious damage. If I remember correctly, you told me at that time that this earthly primitive kind of space travel posed the danger of an incurable disease for the would-be astronauts and that all those who had flown beyond the earthly ozone layer in space capsules had already been afflicted with it. You declared then that something would happen to the brains of these human beings.
That is of correctness, because we explained to you at that time the dangers of space travel, because conquering interstellar space is not as easy as Earth humans imagine it to be. Free space holds many dangers of which Earth humans are not yet aware. In particular, the very dangerous kind of space conquest practiced by the Earth humans causes damage to human beings' health. In the first place, Earth humans have no knowledge whatsoever of the dangerous and organ-damaging radiations which prevail in and pervade outer space. On the other hand, they also lack the knowledge that weightlessness cannot be tolerated by the human body in the long term, which is why it begins to suffer physical and organic damage after 70 hours in a weightless state. If Earth humans, as well as any other omnipotent race is to be classified as such, want to operate spaceflight in space, then the spaceflight equipment must be adapted in every respect to the given conditions, as must also the spacesuits for the life forms themselves. Spaceflight equipment and spacesuits must be protected and made resistant by a special insulating shielding layer with regard to the most diverse body and organ-damaging space radiations and space-swinging waves. This is the most important factor for the preservation of life in space for human beings. But it is also the most important factor for the preservation of the physical and organic health of human beings who move in space with flying objects or in protective suits. The second and equally important factor in this respect emanates from gravity and is to be considered with just as much importance as shielding from space radiation and space vibrations. If these factors are not taken into account, and the flying apparatus and protective suits of the human beings are not made accordingly, that the flying objects and protective suits are made resistant to the external influences of radiation and swinging waves by means of special insulating shields, and that the flying apparatus and protective suits are equipped with their own gravity fields, then the body and the entire organs, as well as the bones of the spacefaring human beings, will suffer damage to their health. Radiation, swinging waves and the like, unprotected flying objects and protective suits, as well as the weightlessness of interstellar space, lead in the first instance to damage to the health of bone and brain organs in human beings and many other life forms. This is in addition to many other forms of health damage that affect the whole body and all organs. If the human being as a life form is not protected by special shielding and by artificial fields of gravity in the space of the world against space radiation and space vibration and against weightlessness, then it will succumb to health damage which, in the most extreme case, will, as a rule, lead to death. The first severe reaction of brain damage I have mentioned, for example, leads in very slight cases to hardly detectable brain swellings, which after some time lead to uncertainty of thought and action and then inevitably to loss of reaction, as a result of which a sudden loss of control of a vehicle or flying apparatus or completely wrong actions against all reason appear. This kind of mild case already occurs in those human beings who stay on Earth itself in containers in which weightlessness is produced. But on the other hand, it also occurs in all those Earth humans who do not leave the Earth for only a very short time and reach beyond the Earth's ozone layer. All this may truly only be done if the necessary protective measures are sufficient. Otherwise, the damage to health is inevitable. If, however, the human being or another life form remains unprotected in weightlessness in space for a very long time, that is to say, for many months or years, then the initially developing brain swelling of inflamed form suddenly develops in reverse order, which then results in brain atrophy, as in the case of weak-minded and old human beings. The substance of the brain itself also undergoes atrophy, so that the whole mass of the brain is subject to this phenomenon of a morbid nature. This disease phenomenon, and it has been proved that it is of this kind, is caused on the one hand by the unrestrained influence of space vibrations and space rays of various kinds, but also by weightlessness. The disease arising from these factors inflames the brain substances and the brain organ itself, after which a new disease factor arises in the short term, which expresses itself as a reduction in brain activity, through a kind of brain substance paralysis, which then leads to a general dwindling of the total brain mass and can no longer be stopped by human and medical and similar means. If the human being remains long enough unprotected and weightless in world space, then the brain shrinkage will eventually lead to the point where the human being loses absolute control over himself, his thoughts and actions, and life. The final end is then madness and death.
Exactly, you explained that to me at the time. But how long will it be before the human beings of Earth will realize the first facts of these facts?
It will be around the middle of the year 1982. In truth, however, only a few facts will be fathomed for the time being, while the final or at least further implications of the effective space dangers will be recognized much later, after the budding space travel will have already claimed Earth human lives.
A question about that sometime. But no, I would better leave it.
Then I want to make further explanations concerning the expected events on Earth. I explained to you that Israel is going to play a very nasty game of a political character, in terms of Palestinian concerns as well as in terms of landlord ambitions. Thus, after the Israeli expulsion of the Palestinians from Beirut, the next step will be that Israel, for the first time, officially stand against the demands and orders of those who until then have given all decisive help to this state, so that Israel, under the leadership of Begin, can carry out its criminal and murderous activities all over the world in general until the time of the expulsion of the Palestinians from Beirut. Thus, after the expulsion of Palestinians, Israel will set itself against the Americans in an open form because, by then, the Begin leadership will recognize that they will have, in the meantime, already safeguarded their murderous political power on the earth to the extent that this step can be dared. When this event occurs, it will be a matter of demands by the American President Reagan on Israel, which will be gloatingly thrown to the winds by Israel, because its murderous political might will indeed have reached a point which will allow its actions in this regard to be justified to the blindly unknowledgeable ones. But America and the rest of the world will nevertheless continue to stand by Israel, still not recognizing what evil game of murderous plans for territorial reign Israel actually harbors.
And in Iran, how are things going on there at this point? There are atrocities going on there that defy all humaneness and being human in the real and true sense. As I calculated years ago, not only are pregnant women and children executed, but also the rape of women will take place before they are shot.
That will also become known in about the month of July 1982, or else in the month of August 1982. What is concealed for the time being, however, is that these women and girls are not only raped and then murdered, but they are subjected to excruciating torture before, during, and after the rapes, with their signs of womanhood also slashed or hacked and cut away with knives.
Cruel pigs. With knives they still maltreat the breasts and genitals of these doomed women. Bastards!
This kind of special torture, as the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and Khomeini's henchmen call it, and which is legalized in such a form that the condemned women and girls, who are even children, are massacred alive, will not only take place in 1982, because it is already being used today, along with many other tortures. But we have already spoken of this in detail, at least with regard to the executions of women and girls in pregnant states, etc. In truth, however, the world should know which kind of horror is actually going on in Iran. As one example among thousands, I can report on events that I myself have observed on my monitors and which have driven up naked horror in me. In a dimly lit dwelling, I saw how a girl of less than 11 years of age put to death in the cruelest wise. Already physically developed as a woman, the child was stretched out on her hands and feet and tied to a hard couch, on which 9 men raped her in the most brutal form. While the last of the criminal and dehumanized creatures was still having his way with the girl, another suddenly drew a knife and hacked the child's young breasts to pieces, while the rapist cried out lustfully and bathed lustfully in the spurting blood. This, however, was only the prelude to the even more terrible end. For now the rest of the beastly creatures fell upon the child, with another knife penetrating the child's vagina and slashing it open, jerking it up to the abdomen so that the intestines spilled out. Another cut off the child's ears, and yet another went on a rampage of murder and bloodlust with a knife against the girl's thighs. The hell of a truly gruesome bloodlust played itself out before finally one of the beastly men put his gun to the child's temple and carried out the final execution. From this, you see that things are truly going on in Iran under the dirty alias of religion, through which the rest of the unknowledgeable world could learn the horror. But still, for a long time, Earth humanity will have no knowledge of these horrific operations, and when it should someday be the case, nevertheless, the Earth humans, on the one hand, are so far removed from the places of these events, and on the other hand, it does not concern them, while their senses are already so jaded against murder, rape, death, cruelty, and bestial killings of human beings that they simply cannot be deeply affected by these facts and events, but simply superficially take note of them, not worrying about it further. And they indulge cheerfully, living high on the hog and in the blinking of an eye of their daily lives, because what the heck, so they think, it does not concern them, and the dead suffer no more pain.
Damn it once more, because the living persons who are brought to death, they lived before that, and before their death they had to suffer these inhumane atrocities.
That is of correctness.
I find that in this regard, it also does not change anything that those who have been killed, and will still be killed in Iran, that before that they exalted this mass killer Khomeini up to heaven, and considering him as God and Savior.
That is correct, because it does not alter the fact that these murders, rapes, cruelties, and inhumanities should have never been committed.
And those who do it anyway, they are 1,000 times worse than ordinary murderers. For such creatures there is not even a name in any language. Nor also for those murderous henchmen who simply carry out death sentences passed by judges. These on-command killers are also much worse than any killer executed by them.
You speak a very true word.
I wish I could change all this madness. There must be a possibility.
Unfortunately, there is not, at least not in the sense that a sudden end could be set for these murders and other inhumane atrocities. There would be only one solution in the long run, and that would be through a transnational party. Therefore, an international peace combat force, and a union with enough members in every country of the earth, which would have ascendance over every other party. This peacekeeping force and party, however, I use this term for better understanding, should be apolitical in every form and relation and be uniformly aimed, through spiritual leadership and fight for peace, to steer the population of each country into the life-correct courses and into the necessary knowledge. In truth, such a peace combat force and party would have to be a uniformly oriented free peace combat community, whereby the framework of the UNO and NATO, in this modified sense, would be exactly the correct one. But it cannot be avoided that these organizations and the community would have a top spiritual leadership with sub-leaderships well informed in the spiritual teaching, after which everything could be truly steered in a creationally given form through these leading forces. There should therefore arise no political machinations in the sense as they are common on earth, and which lead to war, murder, and manslaughter and revolutions. Terrorism and anarchism, criminality, riots, and demonstrations, etc., would also have to be prevented by this, in that all Earth humans would have to be treated uniformly and placed under a uniform order and legislation.
That is easily said because again and again crazy extremists of terroristic character appear in the smallest groups, who organize kidnappings, storm and occupy embassies and schools and state buildings, murder human beings, and then collect millions in extorted money for it, so that they can then make a joyful and pleasant life for themselves with it. And the responsible ones of the countries even help this riffraff in that they, on the one hand, yield to the blackmailing, and on the other hand, even carry out similar actions, whereby it is still given to them that they have and exercise the damned power to provoke wars, whereby, in this regard, they can even engage the damned religions in this, in particular the Christian churches, who themselves really do not want to have peace, but by all means seek and advocate that the countries of the earth produce war armies and war material, accumulate and stockpile these, in order to be able to wage war, always under the guise of the strange and crazy shouting that, indeed, peace according to God's order, and additionally, love must prevail on earth. If one then addresses these idiots and powermongers about this fact, then they say as a response that each country needs an army with adequate weapons in order to be able to ward off an invading enemy. This is an idiocy beyond compare, because if all states have uniformly peaceful intentions and act accordingly, then no country needs armies and weapons of war. A regular security army with corresponding weapons would then suffice to be prepared for contingencies. For example, if inhumane life forms from outer space were to attempt conquest, etc. Nevertheless, I must say that your idea of a worldwide free peace combat community would be very good within the framework mentioned, and indeed, should also be striven for, but which alone would not be enough in today's world. All the crazy warmongers and terrorists, anarchists and demonstrators, etc., could not, for the time being, be subdued and brought to their senses with words and the spiritual teaching. It would require, in this case, a special armed army that would have to comprise millions of men, and which would intervene immediately in every single country and create peace and order where any rebellions, terrorist acts and wars, etc. begin to threaten or erupt. Also, this army would then have to be responsible for immediately and mercilessly segregating for life all participants in such acts of hostility to peace, within the framework of how you have done it for millennia. That the wrongdoers are taken to special guarded and lonely islands, etc., male and female separated from where they could never return to society.
That is of correctness. I would have given you this explanation in addition with the reference to the peacekeeping force. However, you also spoke of terrorism in your remarks, and it is precisely on this topic that I would like to give you a prediction that relates to your home country, Switzerland. Namely, in Bern, so my calculations showed, in the year 1982, the Polish embassy will be taken by terrorists, whereby a smaller number of hostages will fall into their hands. This event will take place around the 6th of September 1982, whereby this terrorist game will not cause any damage to human lives, and will already on the 9th of September, in the course of the 10th to the 11th hour of the morning, it will find its end. Through a smaller detonation of an explosive by the police forces of a Bernese Special Command, which is carried out under the name Stern Star, the police forces gain entrance into the embassy and, first of all, the 4 extremists, the terrorists, will be taken into custody, after which then, in the second place, also the hostages will be released. Since these events concern an incident in the capital of your home country, I made an effort, using a time bypass, to monitor closely the upcoming events, whereby I have made a very deplorable observation, which refers to the acting and thinking of the responsible and enforcing personnel. The Swiss Federal Councillor Kurt Fergler will form a crisis committee, which he himself will chair. Now, on the one hand, I determined that this responsible person is severely religiously entangled, and on the other hand, all of his actions paradoxically come from great insecurity, while another factor relating to this is that he is driven by an unusually strong craving for recognition in his actions and words. At the time of the event, this peculiar combination will lead to the fact that at first there will be great perplexity in combating the terrorist act, after which a solution will only appear much too late. If this person in charge were capable of logical thinking, then the whole event could be brought to an end barely 1.5 hours after the hostage-taking and occupation, by the same process that will only be carried out on the 9th of September. Furthermore, this Kurt Fergler is also very quickly afflicted with anxiety, also in this coming affair, which is why he is not exactly well placed in his post, if only for this reason. Regarding the policemen that will be deployed, similar negative characteristics are to be criticized, because all parties involved only act because the commands are given to them, while fear blazes within them, combined with a peculiar urge for exercising power and violence. In my observations, their movements and actions also testified to their fear and arrogance at the same time.
You want to say that they will behave like small young boys who play India Nerlus, Swiss children's game, and who defeat their enemy in order then to place their foot into the necks of those defeated, while threatening the underdog with deadly weapons. That they will not beat themselves with their weapons across their proud swollen chests like gorillas, and give a Tarzan scream of victory will be like a miracle. But comfort yourself with this. I have already known these poses and practices with the Swiss police forces for 45 years because they do not differ one iota from all other megalomaniac weapon swingers of all other countries on the earth. They all are small, megalomaniac, and illogical young boys who have weapons in their hands to lift themselves up as gods. But they often behave worse than toddlers in their thinking and actions, who are able to think a thought for the first time, and who get to play with a piece of wood for the first time. Small young boys with physically adult bodies who think they know who they are and what they can do.
For my part, I could not have explained these facts in so much detail, but you were capable of this with your vocabulary.
Thank you for the flowers, but after all, I speak with a vocabulary that belongs to my mother tongue.
That is of correctness.
Good. What other new things do you still have in store?
There is still a lot, but before I go on about that, I would like to finish the topic I started earlier.
You mean you want to explain some more regarding the worldwide free peace combat community?
That is of correctness. I want to speak of it again because we began something with it and did not bring it to an end.
There really should not be anything more to say about that. We have gone through the main thing.
It was not mentioned what exact kind of highest leadership such a community would have to correspond to. I think that it is important to say a few words about it. It would thus have to be taken into consideration that such a leader would be free from material ambitions, but also from self-righteousness, selfishness, unlogic and all other faulty concerns which could lead to greed for power, arrogance, inequality, and favoritism of one or the other, or to other occurrences and manifestations of a negative form, as is, unfortunately, the case today on earth with all rulers without exception. Furthermore, with regard to a necessary army, it is still to be explained that it would very well have to hold a position of power. That, however, in logical Gevalt, which means that a Gevalt Sam Aga Vault Los Ik Kite one would have to prevail in accordance with the creational laws.
Yes, I understand, but this is probably a subject that, apart from our group members, no outsider human beings will grasp so quickly, because outsiders have no idea of what Gavault Sam Aga Vault Los Ik Kite or logical Gavault means and how it works.
That is of correctness, which is why we should also not dwell on it and return to the course of events in the future. As an exception, I would like to talk about an event that is not of great importance to mention in and of itself, because too many such events are constantly occurring and cannot be stopped, because those responsible for them are not responsive to corresponding preventive measures, because their greed for money and irresponsibility is more pronounced and predominant than responsibility and the safety of their fellow human beings. On the other hand, I would like to mention this event because it will take place where a core group member lives, so in Pfeffikon, where Hannah resides. It will be the 12th of September, 1982, exactly at 14:57 Hrs, when a large passenger transportation vehicle from Germany with about 40 passengers from a seniors association from Sindelfingen is hit by a train coming into Pfeffikon from Feraltorf because the safety barriers have not been closed and is torn to shreds like a rotten wooden box. The sad result of this accident will be around 39 deaths, which are to be blamed on those responsible, money-grubbing and oblivious people who are responsible for railway road crossings. But also responsible for this are all those who, as construction companies, accept and carry out contracts to create such railway road crossings. But also responsible for this are all those workers who are involved in the execution and construction of such projects. And also responsible for this are the architects who plan such railway road crossings. But also responsible are the engineers, planners, organizers, and, first and foremost, those who, as those responsible for the railways, commission such life-threatening crossings for planning and execution. For several decades now, and quite particularly at the present highly technical time, such railway road crossings in all forms and on all roads and paths have represented an unparalleled irresponsibility and a criminal machination, the likes of which cannot be found on earth, if everything except warlike and similar acts are taken into consideration. What those responsible for the railways and those in power do in this respect, and not only in Switzerland, corresponds to legalized murder, for which all those must be held responsible who have lifted or are lifting even one finger for such crossings, or who have put or are putting even one thought into power for them. Already for decades, such crossings in small and large scale should no longer exist, but ought to have been safeguarded by underpasses, by which no street or road would lead across a railroad track. That this has not already been so for a long time, for this, no excuse can find validation.
While it is indeed unfortunate what will happen, perhaps it will help the SBB and other railway companies at home and abroad to become smarter.
Unfortunately, this will not be the case. Also, not for the car drivers themselves, who usually, like the driver of the autocar, travel the roads at excessive speed without being in control of their vehicle. If this circumstance were not also decisive on the 12th of September 1982, then the accident could be avoided just like the one in Monaco, in which, however, only a passenger car holding a few persons is thrown out of the lane in a hairpin bend, in which the Princess of Monaco then finds herself, namely the former film actress Grace Kelly, who suffers serious injuries as a result of the accident, so that she has to be taken to a clinic for care, etc., where she then dies, however.
Death does not even make a stop before these grates, because with it there are no differences. That sounds a bit brutal, but it is true.
It sounds brutal. That corresponds to correctness, but what you said is also right. Furthermore, I know very well what feelings dominate you in a sad form, even though you speak so coldly and seemingly impassively of death and of those who are killed through human fault alone.
Particularly in relation to this so-called human fault, I would like to speak for once. What do you think about it? Is it not the case that there is always human fault in such events, even if the technology fails? I think to myself, and this is how I actually see it, that a technical failure also corresponds to a human failure, and thus to an error or a possible fault of a human being. Because the technical maintenance is only carried out inadequately, and because the necessary controls are also not carried out. For my part, I find, for example, that a car alone would have to be tested and checked from A to Z at least every 14 days, if it is used very frequently.
Your assumption corresponds to correctness. In every point, also with the checking of the vehicles, because they would have to be subjected to a thorough check after any prolonged use, even if they were only used for 1 or 2 weeks. That is also how it is handled with our flying apparatuses and other means of transportation. Although we are, in technical terms, around 3,500 years ahead of terrestrial, still quite primitive technology. Experience has taught us and our ancestors that such and also very precise controls are necessary after any prolonged use. And since this rule became valid for us, there were never any more accidents, neither in air, at sea, on land,
or in space.
except when any security measures were ignored, which led the way to technical failure of the transportation devices, or when it came to foreign influences, of which the human skill and technology had not become masters. However, such accidents have occurred very rarely in the last 2,000 years or so, whereby, up to the present hour, their number only amounts to 16.
Man, we should also have so few accidents on the Earth, but on the other hand, it is to be said that such controls are probably hardly feasible due to the costs and the countless vehicles.
It would be very feasible if such a pronounced materialism and egoism, etc., did not prevail among Earth humans, along with the poverty of duty recognition, duty fulfillment, and love for those next to us.
You bring ideas that the Earth twits cannot yet understand in any wise.
Which they do not want to understand because their materialism and their personal welfare, etc., always come first.
My son, you speak to me from the heart.
The purest truth, it could not be purer.
Even with this, the human of the Earth are also not very precise.
This is also known to me, and for this Earth-human activity, there is no excuse.
I also think so. I agree with your opinion.
Good. Then I can now continue to report on the coming events, whereby I have to mention Israel, which will not rest after the expulsion of the Palestinians from Beirut, but already begins with new acts of war shortly afterwards, but this time against the Syrians stationed in Lebanon, whereby Syrian missile positions are destroyed by bombing, after which these bombings then expand again to the city of Beirut, and as always, the attacks are naturally triggered by Israel. This criminal act constitutes only the prelude to another crime, which will be planned by Menachem Begin, the Israeli head of state. Similarly, like the case of the assassination of the Egyptian president Sadat, he will set up the same intrigue another time and bring it to fruition. Also in this case, his criminal and murderous intrigue will be crowned with success, as in the case of the assassination of Sadat. Namely, through Begin's intrigue and through treacherous, hired assassins, an approximately 200-kilo heavy and portable bomb will be produced in order to deposit it in a house and cause an explosion, during which time the new head of state to be Bashir Gemayel will be there. Apart from this man, still another approximately 30 human beings will find death through these intrigues and murder attacks of Begins. The cause of this, to be anticipated, criminal act on around the 14th of September 1982 will be that this criminal to humankind and mass murderer will come up with the idea that he can, through this machination, let his army forces march into Lebanon officially as an alleged peace-maintaining troop and a security troop, which he will actually succeed in doing, because no leader of the earth and no citizen will come to the thought that this assassination, like with Sadat, will, solely through Begin's initiative, and will and in cooperation with treacherous Arab-Lebanese elements, come to materialization. Officially, as with Sadat's assassination, on Begin's behalf, the treasonous forces will not be recognized as the tools of Begin, because the performers act in the belief that they would only serve their organization alone, without knowing that their high-level personnel are in common cause with Begin in traitorous and intrigue-like manner. This is how Menachem Begin will succeed in taking another step in relation to his plans of country conquest, without the leaders of the world and the nations throughout it having even the slightest idea of what truthfully is being played out.
This Begin is probably the evilest son of a bitch walking this globe at present and for some time to come.
That is of correctness, because the next ones to equal Begin are not yet in office, whereas in later times the worst people's criminal and murderer will be Ariel Sharon, whose swearing in as Prime Minister will take place on the 6th of February 2001.
And the world's leaders above all are straw stupid, for how else could they misjudge the real machinations and land-robbing plans and so on?
This is also of correctness, because even after this new crime, the world leaders will continue to support Israel's and Begin's plans and assassinations, etc., without recognizing the truth. For this reason, I will have to make many more predictions concerning Israel.
You will give your explanations chronologically about that.
That is of correctness.
Good. Then I have another question that does not relate to this wannabe leader and criminal number one. You talked about the death of Grace Kelly, but you did not give any specific dates.
I omitted that, yes. Her death occurs in the evening hours of the 14th of September 1982, although the accident will have happened the day before. The reason for her death will be that there is damage to the brain which leads to a hemorrhage which is recognized too late. This will become the main factor in her death, although two other life-threatening factors will come into play as a result of the accident.
So it is a failure of the doctors, so to speak.
Not directly, but only indirectly.
What am I supposed to understand by that?
The princess will be hooked up to a life support machine, but it will soon be put out of action because the doctors come to the realization after some time that Grace Grimaldi's life functions will be purely mechanical.
You mean that she will be dead, but that the life support machine will still continue to keep the motor life mechanism going?
That is of correctness, but we should not dwell on that because it is not of importance. More important are other events that are taking place only one day after the death of the princess. It will come to
I have another question about this. You said the name Grace Grimaldi. Is that the family name of Prince Rainier of Monaco?
That is of correctness. But now listen to what follows next. Before the burial of the princess can take place, the insane Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran will have his best friend and longtime comrade in arms, Sadegh Ghautbzadeh, executed by a firing squad of revolutionary troops, thus eliminating what was probably Khomeini's most devout and obedient follower of the preceding period. His fate in this regard will result from his realizing far too late that Khomeini is addicted to madness and suffers from a pathological bloodlust and murderousness, coupled with cowardly fear, so that he unhesitatingly has everyone punished by death whom he considers dangerous to himself. However, this criminal event is already overshadowed by a much worse event in Beirut on the 17th and 18th of September 1982. Another time, in fact, Begin's intrigues orchestrate a mass murder that is intended to be and will be useful to his plans. In further consequence, forces controlled by him undertake something which again will not be recognized by anyone as the work of the Israeli mass murderer and criminal of the state. Through the state traitors loyal to Begin, the leaders of the Christian militias in Beirut will be caused to let their armed militia forces invade the refugee camps of the Palestinians in order to wreak an indescribable bloodbath and massacre among the Palestinians, seizing women, men, and children, and this will not find anything equal to it so quickly. And all this will happen under the protection and supervision of Israel, which with its military forces in Beirut will even ensure that the murderous Christian militias of the Lebanese can march into the refugee camps, after which the massacre will claim more than 6,000 human lives. Only after the massacre is over will Israel officially intervene and pretend to stop this killing. Truthfully, however, the intervention will only occur to cover up Begin's criminal actions, and thus wash his hands before the world public in innocence. The fact will be that this massacre and the entry of Begin's troops into Beirut will only serve the purpose of further expanding Begin's land domination plans in the first place, while the second reason will be to make this massacre possible. The murder of Bashir Gemayel, orchestrated by Begin, will make it easy for this murderous criminal to win over the Lebanese Christian militias for himself and his plans, namely to murder and exterminate the Palestinians remaining in Lebanon. The leaders of the Christian militias will go along with Begin's plans if he promises them that he will have the Israeli army enter Beirut for their protection for the massacre enterprise, which he will promise and have carried out. Once this murderous enterprise is over, however, Begin will have his army withdraw from Beirut again because, after all, he will see his aims in this matter realized.
An unparalleled murder and intrigue racket. Who and what is this murderer actually?
He is the product of a marital disgrace, and, moreover, a brother-in-arms of the criminal Sharon, who, in the most important army position, puts Begin's orders into practice. Sharon is the real army leader, and this man, standing as Begin's fighting brother, is in no wise inferior to Begin himself. The fact of the reason of Begin's and Sharon's fighting brotherhood is, however, unknown everywhere else except to their parents, for only the parents of these two criminal and murderous elements know the secret of the relations of the two with each other, as well as their tendencies, which they often also do together, which is publicly unknown. But enough of this, for these concerns are not of much importance, for what the future brings is more significant. At the end of October, or the beginning of November 1982, Begin and Sharon will be recognized as the perpetrators of the Beirut massacres. But unfortunately, they will hardly be held accountable, even if many righteous Israelis intervene against the two criminals. Thus, everything remains the same for the time being. Around the 5th of November 1982, Switzerland, France, Andorra, and Spain are hit by unusually large and severe phone storms, warm, dry winds that blow down from the mountains. Many human lives, animals, and buildings, as well as nature itself, will suffer greatly and sustain damage amounting to billions of Swiss francs. Many deaths will also have to be lamented, and not only in the countries mentioned. America and the Hawaiian Islands will also suffer heavy damage, and human lives will be lost in large numbers. Whereby California, in particular, is to be mentioned, but this will be caused by violent high sea storms which will race over the land. Smaller and medium-sized villages will be destroyed as if they had been razed to the ground by explosive bombs. On the 10th of November 1982, Russia will fall into a state of national mourning. For on this day, at 4:16 hours, the leader Leonid Brezhnev will end his life, but unlike others, he will meet his end peacefully in his sleep. His successor will be a certain Yuri Andropov. At about the same time in the Federal Republic of Germany, the vicious and murderous power of the RAF will break. For at that time the leading heads of this criminal organization will fall into the hands of the police. First and foremost, it concerns the gang members Adelheid Schultz and Brigitte Mohnhaupt. After which, on the 16th of November, the actual supreme head of the gang, Christian Klar, will also fall into a police trap and be arrested. With the months of October and November comes the time when the Italian, Swiss, Turkish, French, and German security and police forces finally recognized that the Pope's assassin was not a loner and did not just work for himself, but that he belonged to a conspiracy and had accomplices.
I thought, according to your information, that he was working alone.
Then you misunderstood me, because my statements only referred to the facts of the event in the sense of what will be known to the earthly authorities and security forces at the time of the event and for some time afterwards. It may well be that my explanations gave the strong impression that the assassin was a lone handler.
I also understood that to be the case, because you did say that he was actually...
That is of correctness, but my statement refers only to the initial facts which will be known at the time of the event and some time afterwards.
Then I misunderstood you. I was too inattentive. So go ahead and tell of things to come.
Sure. The month of November and the month of December will put the Earth in a dangerous position, and again into danger of nuclear war, to which we do not yet know whether we are allowed to take any countermeasures to avert this danger. The reason for this danger, how could it be otherwise, will be provided by the American President Ronald Reagan, who is crazy enough as a warmonger to want to station new nuclear missiles in Europe, which will displease the Russians and drive them to station similar weapons of death on European territory themselves, should Reagan stick to his insane plan.
The guy's out of his mind.